Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. Scripting. Now, I've talked a little bit about scripting in the past before, but I thought I'd talk a little bit more about it, and specifically this time, what makes a good fit for writing a script versus just getting the job done in the first place. Way back when I was a LAN intern for HSBC, I had some interactions with the servers team, and I wasn't in the servers section. I was working specifically with the LAN team for working with people's desktops, their daily drivers. But the servers guys had a saying, which was, a server admin only fixes a problem once. And after that, he has a script to do it for him. I have not always followed that particular line of thinking. For example, if there's an issue that I fix once in 10 years' time, does it make sense for me to write, debug, troubleshoot, and maintain a script versus just taking 10, 15 minutes, even an hour? An hour once every 10 years is not too bad compared to 4 hours that it might take to write, debug, and troubleshoot a script, and then either maintain it or forget everything about it and have to go back and relearn everything about it in 10 years when the thing comes back up again. So there's space for that. And another good example of this is for moving user profiles around. I had to do a boatload of work for moving some user profiles for a customer, and I wrote a script to do it. Nice, big, complicated thing, because it was doing a lot of steps. I think by the end of it, there was like 11 steps that needed to be completed for each user. Perfect reason to use a script. But then I had another move. Wasn't actually a move. I just had to update user paths for a whole bunch of user accounts in Active Directory for a different customer. And I went, okay, well, I already have a script that does this as part of the 11 steps, but I don't really need all the other steps. And I started from a place of thinking, okay, how do I modify this script so that it only does some of the steps? I can include a parameter to say only do these steps, and then maybe I can extend it by adding other parameters and everything else. And I realized this is too complicated. I'm talking about modifying a script which is itself over 300 lines of code, when what I actually want is a 12-line script that just loops through all the accounts in Active Directory. Does it start with this target server value? Okay, update it, write it back to Active Directory. That's all I needed. 12 lines of code, easy peasy. So I went, okay, for this job specifically, I just need something that will work and do the job. So that's what I wrote, and it worked perfectly. It worked incorrectly, I might add, because I found a bug in it afterwards, but it worked perfectly because the logic was sufficient that it didn't update or touch anything that it shouldn't have. So even though my initial setup was overbroad, I pulled in more accounts than I had to, but the logic caught it all and handled it. So, okay, fine. So even though it wasn't correct, it still worked 100% correctly. So where's the break point in that? I would submit that scripting is most useful to us as network admins under a few circumstances. I was going to say 2 circumstances specifically, but let's just say a few, because there might be others that I haven't thought of, certainly. The first one is if it's going to be done a lot. If it's going to be done a lot, then having a script has a lot of benefits. It's standardized. It's always going to be the same steps executed in the same order with similar results, or at least known deviations that you can plan for and catch in your script. That's a great thing. Another reason to use a script is if there are a lot of steps that all need to be done accurately. Another good example of this would be a new user script that I wrote for a customer. And I wrote it because there were several very specific conditions that needed to be met in this customer's setup. And I knew it was something that our help desk team would be unfamiliar with. So I wrote a script to do it for them. Simple enough. I just sat down. I started writing on a Friday, kept writing all the way to a Sunday, and by the time I was done, I had 1,150 lines of code. Over 1,000 lines of code? Yeah, now a lot of this was menuing and prompting people for the correct values so that the script would, take the correct set of actions afterwards. Very deterministic, but it has worked really well at that particular customer site, because as long as people are using the script, we know all the steps will be completed in order with the correct parameters every single time, because it's standardized. And yes, people could absolutely do this on their own if they learned how, but it's a one-off site. Nobody else has this setup, so nobody else has this script either. So though there are two reasons for a script. One is, it's something that you can do down and dirty, and you're going to be doing it a lot, so you just write a script to automate it. Or there's a lot of steps. You're not necessarily going to be doing this a lot, but there are a lot of steps that you want to make sure that you think through all of them in advance and write them out in the script, so that when you actually go through the process, the script is doing all the things. You're not worried about missing something or forgetting it or what have you. So there's a couple of advantages there. But when you write your script, how do you want to write your script? This is something that trips me up a lot. I tend to go crazy with, okay, well, I can add a parameter here, and I can add a parameter there, and I can add a switch so that it'll do two different things depending on what switch I give it and all the rest. There's value in that for some things. If you want to write something that can be used as a multi-purpose tool or can be used at many different customer sites, having a parameter is a great way of dealing with that, because you can just pass that information in dynamically. And I would argue it's more accessible that way, rather than saying, oh, you have to open the script and find the variable at the top of the file and tweak that just the way that you need to have it. Yeah, you can do that, and that's probably what you will do for a down and dirty one-time run thing. But if you parameterize something, it is more extensible. It's also a lot more difficult to troubleshoot, because you have to account for many different values that can be passed in, and it's certainly longer. As an example, if I'm using PowerShell, I can do a standard variable assignment in one line of code. Yeah, easy. If I want to do a parameter, that's probably going to be more like 4 lines of code, as I have a parameter declaration. Maybe it's mandatory. Maybe I have a line of help text. Maybe I have a declarative of what type of value it is. Maybe it's a file info value, which will validate that it's a valid file name rather than just a string value. And then the actual variable name itself. There could be many things that I want to include in this parameterization, and that will have an effect. If I have like 6 to 8 different variables that I want to include in there, we're talking 6 to 8 lines of code versus 24 to 32 lines of code, plus spacing, plus being able to read it all, understand it all, and troubleshoot it all. So yeah, that's a thing. And then we get into the additional fun in PowerShell of parameter sets and making sure that the sets are all done correctly so that it becomes a potential nightmare if you haven't thought through it, or if you're thinking through it on the fly as you're writing it, which is also something that I tend to do. I go in with a shell of an idea, but then I work out the details as I'm writing the code. And I would bet that a lot of people do the same thing. So sometimes I go in thinking, oh, I can add parameters and I can do all this, but all I need is just a single down and dirty do this. If I decide that I want to take it to another customer later down the road, then maybe I can take this proven script that I've used successfully and change a few things so that I can parameterize it. What happens when things go wrong? Well, I had a vendor who was like, oh, hey, I came up with these couple lines of code that do a job that we want to do for, clearing out old log files. And I looked at that and I went, I see a couple of potential issues with this. Technically, this is scanning the whole hard drive. That's inefficient. And it's destroying anything that has this value in it, regardless of where in the hard drive it is. That might not be great. And I went, you know what, I can write a script to do this. That ended up being 350 lines of code. It had several parameters. It had lots of different parameter sets that you could adjust logging and put the log in different places and give it a different route path that it would start scanning from, and lots of cool things that I thought was a great way to deal with this. And the vendor looked at it and went, I can't read this. I don't know PowerShell. I know how to read the command that I wrote, and it does the job. And I went, yeah, it does the job, but it doesn't do the job good enough for me. Who uses that script? Me. That's all. I made it available to the vendor. I said, here's something that I wrote. We're working on this together. You feel free to take it, and you can use these parameters to adjust it for other sites. They're not going to use it because they don't understand it. Was it useful for me to write that script? I mean, probably for our own environment, it was useful enough to write it, but it wasn't nearly as useful as I thought. So you gotta figure out, okay, is the time I'm putting into writing this as a script going to be useful? It could be. It could be you have a super complex job that you're only going to do once, but it needs to be done perfectly. And maybe a script is the right way to do that. It might be something that's really repetitive and you want to be able to automate it, or just have an easier way of, stringing several commands into one and bang, be done with it. Script is great for that as well. But there are also jobs where it just might not be usable because somebody doesn't understand it, or it takes too much time to be worthwhile. Any one of a number of things. So scripting can be a very powerful thing, but you have to put some thought into it and figure out when and where it's going to be most useful and worth your time. And that's my NetAdmin thought of the day for you. If you have thoughts on other things that you'd like to hear me talk about, or things that you'd like to see me demonstrate, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door NetAdmin, and we will see you next time.